All right, thank you very much. Mark is graciously allowing us to use his laptop. We are doing a session. This is actually a pre-release. Official release will be this fall for a game that we're really proud to put out, mainly because of, I think, because of the relationships we built and we came together with a great group of people from Wisconsin Public Television. Also, teachers throughout the state of Wisconsin were involved in helping us build the game, and Dave and I will be here representing the Field Day Lab, which is a media design lab here at UW. And we're going to very quickly, we're using Google Slides, which is one of the times that this really pans out great. Alyssa, do you want to introduce your team really quickly?
Sure. My name is Alyssa Tsagong. I'm the Director of Education from Wisconsin Public Television. And I have here Rodney Lambright, who's part of our animation and design team. Welcome, Rodney. John Dollar, who's part of our education team as an education specialist, but returning to the classroom at Sauk Prairie High School. And then Mike Scoville, who is a teacher in Door County, who is one of the teacher fellows on the game. Welcome, everybody. We're almost working.
So the way that this project, and we'll show some slides going together, came together was essentially Field Day builds digital media, works with teachers often, almost 100% of the time in order to build that digital media. Wisconsin Public Television will have a short slide here. It took us about a year to end up with the product that we're going to be releasing, the game we're going to be releasing in this fall, that is built for 3rd and 4th grade teachers and students in order to engage them in doing historical inquiry. One of the really cool things about this project is that it focuses on Wisconsin history, and in part that was because of two things, which was the anniversary for the state capitol, and then the second thing is that we also get funding from the Department of Public Instruction here in Wisconsin in order to work specifically with K through 12 teachers. Alyssa, do you want to talk about WPT's role and why this project came about?
Sure, and so you'll be ready for the slide when we see it, that sometimes as we are working around the state, people say, I know what Wisconsin Public Television is, I can imagine PBS Kids, I have an idea of what that means, but what do you do in education? And actually, it's part of why we were invented. 100 years ago, radio was actually invented on this campus in Science Hall. And so, right when the invention of radio occurred here in Madison, people immediately wondered, how could we use this to serve the Wisconsin idea, and specifically, how can we use it to serve education? And so in those early airwaves were the innovation of creating things like content that could be used in classrooms through the radio. And as public broadcasting has evolved, we've evolved with that to serve educators through then moving from the radio waves to the television screen, and things like Sesame Street and The Friendly Giant and others made the way for videos in the classroom. And then as we've moved forward, that's moved forward. So here's School of the Air from Wisconsin Public Radio, where children would take a break from their one-room schoolhouse idea of one teacher teaching every subject to have some instruction come from Madison and things like singing and drawing and other things. And so today, that challenge for us to serve educators through technology is, of course, online. And so right now, as we've kind of been positioned at Wisconsin Public Television to reinvent how we serve Wisconsin educators, that was a great catalyst in combination with this 100 years of the Wisconsin State Capitol and Field Day and Wisconsin Public Television, kind of curiously partner dating for a couple of years, wondering what are we uniquely positioned to do together, and that made the right combination for us to seize this moment to explore how could our teams bring our talents and expertise together with teachers to do something to celebrate this history work.
So here's this is one of the screen captures from the game, just to show you as well. This is placed, for those of you who know the Wisconsin State Capitol. Looks like a lot of state capitals to some extent, but that's the rotunda for the state capitol. What we're going to do today is Mike's going to talk for just a second, And then we're going to try to just have people play the game for 10 minutes to get a feel. The goal is basically just for you to get a feel, get a sense of the art, get a sense of what the character does in the particular game, and then we'll do that for about 15 minutes, and we will at that point stop and then sort of talk a little bit about how we got from nothing to actually having this game, and focus mostly on our work with teachers as part of field day fellowships as well, which is something that's important to WPT as well as to us. But we'll let Mike talk. So Mike was a teacher fellow. There are 15 fellows plus about another 5 teachers who participated in doing testing as well.
So I'm the. I can stay.
We'll give you this.
I need this.
No, you just can hold it, I think.
Mic on a mic. Okay. So my job as the library media specialist, I see everybody in our school. We're a pretty small school district. We have less than 600 students K-12. In my job, I see every student at least every week. So that's me in the orange. But just 2 pictures, just to give you an idea. If you think, well, it's library, it's just all books. We do a lot with differentiation and coding. So the top picture up there you see is some students that were given a robot and an instructional book, and their job was to program the robot to go down the aisle and come back. The bottom one is dealing with coding with kindergartners, and for them the computer kind of is a little bit intimidating at first. So we do it all by directional, and they have to get to the basket of candy, which is off the side, with somebody else instructing them how many steps to take. So that's my job. And when the idea of would you be interested came about, I had worked with Wisconsin Public Television to do the Hometown Stories the year before, Hometown Stories Door County. So that kind of got me like perked and interested. And because I'm not a classroom teacher, I didn't know if I'd fit, but I was welcomed, and it was awesome. It was awesome to work with.
All right, a quick question for you. How many people have a device of some sort that it could be a mobile, it could be an iPad, or it could be a desktop or a laptop type of tablet? Can you get your hand way up in the air?
Hopefully it's not a desktop.
Okay. Anyone have a desktop with them? All right. So I think we have enough without us handing out any devices for you to sort of, you're going to play next to somebody, and I'll share with you the link to get to it, but I just wanted to really quickly just frame it for just a second. You play as Jo Wilder, who is a young girl here, is a little bit skeptical about history at first, but has a grandfather who is a historian, and so through her adventures, she kind of becomes more infatuated and sees the beauty in history. And it's really about historical inquiry. So you're going to engage with some real artifacts from the historical archives. There's a jersey, quote unquote, in the case right there. We worked with our archivists from the state of Wisconsin to help us sort of figure out which types of artifacts you would be engaging with in this particular story. And then the second thing is that what you're going to do is find clues in order to try to properly identify what these historical artifacts are. Okay. It is a point-and-click adventure game, and so you'll also notice that it's I think for us, we are really excited about saying how can this also be used in a language arts context and in a social studies plus language arts context as well, which is really big in the 4th grade. So this is geared towards 3rd through 4th grade students. If you go to fielddayLab.org, you will see on our splash screen here, you're going to say Play Jo Wilder, and you can click on that, and it'll begin to bring you to the point where you can actually start playing the game. We'll be around. If you have questions about art while we're playing, Rodney was involved in the artwork here. All right. Who else is here? Mike Tully was involved as a developer on this project. Dave Gagnon is the back. He's the head honcho, the lead, our guide at Field Day. Was heavily involved as executive producer in this game as well, so you can ask him questions. But this is where the chaos will happen, but also the fun. We're going to take about 15 minutes, and I'll give you a 5-minute warning when we're done. So go, and if you have any questions, just raise your hand. All right, we have one right there.
How do we get on the internet?
Oh, internet. Oh, wow. Okay, that's a really good question. What you will do is go to...
Everybody log on to Steve Gagnon.
Yeah, no. There's a guest internet password. for the university. You're going to try to get on UWNet, okay? And if you go on UWNet, and then you'll get a thing, and there's going to be a spot that says create a guest network on the bottom. So I probably should project this.
You can't show it. Already logged in.
On the bottom of it, it will be guest network. You log in with your email address. It'll give you a temporary internet connection that you can use for the rest of the day. If you are, there's also EduRoam here for those of you who do EduRoam. So, any internet-related Wi-Fi questions or gameplay questions, just throw your hand up, and we'll take about 15 minutes to give you a chance to walk through the game.
So just really quickly, I wanted to kind of tell you a little bit of the why and the how we built it. So one of the key shifts that happened that was really exciting during development is that it started with, let's build a game about history. And we had some authors that came in and some historians and kind of this panel of experts, and we're trying to build a game about the history of the Capitol, which was a cool exercise to do. But really quickly, kind of as we dug into that, there was this pivot where we said, what if we don't build about history, but we build a game where you are a little historian? You take on this role of this little detective who's trying to figure out what all this stuff means. And there was this moment of kind of comic switch where we originally were joking about some archaeologist that would be your kind of nemesis, because even though he was cool and hip, he was getting it all wrong because he was kind of relying on his own reputation. And you might have met Wells. In private, I'll tell you the term that we Googled to find the inspiration art for him, but it was pretty funny. So we found this just really horrible guy that was supposed to just be super hip, but no expertise. So the pivot that you'll see in the game now is, instead of kind of hitting you over the head with all these details of what happened and when and why, instead it kind of unfolds through you playing a little detective. And we're really happy with that pivot, because what it meant is that Joe Wilder in the Capitol Case, this game allows us to explore the idea of women's suffrage, and then also the idea of how Earth Day was created. It would be easily expandable to kind of other local history and other topics as they come up. So we're able to hit on some pretty big ideas without kind of hitting you over the head with them. So hopefully you had enough of the game to get a preview of that, to see that you're kind of finding facts and finding experts and corroborating evidence. And if you would have gotten a little farther, we expect about 20 minutes, you have a time where you have to defend your theory or your understanding based on the evidence that you've collected along the way. And that forms the majority of the game loop. So you find evidence, you build up theories, and then eventually you go argue them to the boss. And you get it right, you get it wrong sometimes, and there's two plots happening in parallel, with your badger going missing, as well as the artifact that you're investigating, but all build this idea of you being a detective and doing inquiry yourself. So we'll do a quick plug right now and then later, but also we're going to be using this with teachers now in the coming semester, where this game becomes the launching spot for them to do a local inquiry project with their students. So the idea is that they would play the game, but then they would use that as a way to investigate their own local history over a longer semester-long project. So we're excited to see the game situated in that kind of curriculum as well. That's all I had to say.
So I mentioned this earlier, but really one of the core values for our team at Field Day, and the same with Wisconsin Public Television, is that we know that students and teachers are going to be the end users of the stuff that we build. And so we really not only value, but think it's incredibly important. It makes our products better, the things that we build better, to bring them on at different stages in the process. And this is one of the examples where we're able to bring teachers in very early, even in the ideation stage. So we ran 2 fellowships. The very first fellowship was a game design fellowship, was really to be thinking about the big ideas of what the game might look like. And then we ran a second fellowship, which is when we started getting more into the production phase. So what did we do? We started with a 2-day kickoff meeting. 10 teachers from around the state of Wisconsin who all applied and were accepted based on their interest and expertise and the fact that they were actually be using a game in their classroom. 10 teachers, we brought game designers and media experts, people from Wisconsin Public Television, our own team, developers, artists, et cetera, educational researchers, and then also really important were a group of historians and archivists who also joined us, and museum educators, to bring their expertise into play around public humanities and how do we wrestle with some of these problems around representing history that are not as familiar to us, and they have a lot of expertise in that. This would be an example. We went to the State Historical Archives. Part of this is a professional development for the teachers and even us as designers, but for the teachers about what do professional historians do, what do professional archivists do, what type of work can can you take from that experience, and then how can you get your students engaged in a similar type of work? That involved, we started doing all that, and we got together and we started developing some really high-level game ideas. But some key questions like, what would the game explore in terms of content and skills and concepts that were important for third and fourth graders, fifth graders to engage in? And what should players do in the game? Those were really high-level conversations that we were having. We walked out of that with some skeleton and early ideas of the game. What we did at that point is WPT, Wisconsin Public Television, and Field Day designers came together and started taking all of that initial ideation and presented some game ideas and some skeletons that we then went back to the teachers and said, here's some initial artwork, here are some initial game ideas, what do you think? And then we had that ready to go for our second workshop, which was the Game Production Fellowship. This time we really started to get even more into the nitty gritty of what the character would do, what Joe Wilder would do in the game, and we focused on working with, this is for those of you from Wisconsin in particular, this is Bobby Malone, who wrote the textbooks and activities around thinking like a historian here in Wisconsin. Right, so she came in and talked to us about that and educated us on some of those things. We practiced our own inquiry skills. They brought some stuff out of the archives. There's Rodney showing his chops in doing historical inquiry. Again, from a professional development standpoint, teachers don't always come in with a lot of game design or even game expertise. This is Phil Dougherty, who's a lead developer at Field Day, is teaching a little bit about point-and-click adventure games because that's what we were going to be building. By this point, we knew that we had a narrative game that was going to be a point-and-click adventure game, so LA Noire style, and teachers were really involved in thinking of what are the different cases that Joe Wilder might go on. You got a starting artifact, let's build out these things. And from that's how we came up with the final ones. This is us doing ideation. Someone had a great one about Paramount Records here in Wisconsin. And then we find that the last stage of that was once we came out of that second workshop, we developed our very first digital prototypes of those games, and they got developed across a series of iterations in classrooms. And then we're going to have Mike just sort of talk about his experience through all of those things. I think from the early iteration to the building the prototypes, but also working with his kids and what that experience was like.
So the first thing that I would say is being involved from the very beginning. The one hardest part that I had to realize is it wasn't my idea. You know, all of us came in with, well, let's do this. And then pretty soon it became a group. And then as we shared within the group, it was edited and different pieces were kind of put in and switched. So I had to let that go. It wasn't my idea. And as an end result, it's pretty cool. So like I said, I get to go into classrooms and they come to me. So the first picture up there you see actually fifth graders play testing. And then on the bottom two pictures you have two different sixth grade classes play testing. We've been involved, Gibraltar was involved from the very beginning when play testing was, here are some sketches. So I would work with the fourth graders, and the coolest part, trying to do, teach them something that was really new. They had started talking about Wisconsin history, so they kind of had an idea. But I pumped up, we're going to be play testing this video game, and then when they saw it was just sketches. And they were like, what's going on? Like, what is this? I said, you're from the beginning. You're working on this from the beginning. And some kids that have played video games jumped right in. They're like, okay, so what about? How's this person? And then some kids, kind of sat back and just watched. But what I was asked to do is kind of record from the background. What did I hear? What did I see? And then there were a bunch of questions I was asked. So what I did with fourth grade is I turned it into their job. After they got done, they were sent to a link that asked them the same questions. That was my way of teaching Google Forms for them. So they were able to then go in and answer the questions, and then we looked at the survey results at the end, what they thought. And I'm not going to say it was because of us, but one of the big debates, and again, they were just learning about Wisconsin history, is why is there no badger? Why is there no robin? Like, those are our state animals. Why aren't they in there? So I don't want to say it was because of us, but the next time they play tested it, that's when the badger showed up. So they were all like, hey, this is cool. And it was really funny hearing people go, "Oh no," as you were playing it, because that's exactly what they did. What? The badger's gone? So that becomes then, well, the whole while, well, what happened to the badger? What happened to the badger? Pretty cool stuff. But we play tested it all year, and each time they were like, you know, you have some of those students that are looking for like kind of the mischievous kind of stuff, and some just kind of sat back and took the whole thing. Well, we've got those mischievous kids that are like, hey, they changed the map. The map changed. Or, hey, last time I played this, the arrow went through the desk when I moved it. You know, so they were looking for all those kind of loopholes in it. I will say at the end of the year, when I said that this will be coming out, you know, maybe over the summer, beginning of fall, I have received at least one email every single day from a student wanting to know when they can play it. This last picture, I think, kind of sums up the whole thing. So these are fourth graders. We've play tested the whole year. You saw the yellow jersey from the very beginning, and that's really the only level that we've play tested. So they have no idea what the rest of the game is, which is why they really want to know, because you don't find out what happened to the badger in the first level. So this is the group of fourth graders. We, the last 2 years, we have actually traveled from northern Door County all the way to Madison. We go to the museum, go to the Capitol, and then head back. It's a long day. But the cool part is when we first started talking about this game, it was, these are real things. These are real artifacts, things that formed our history. When we were in the museum, they found the yellow jersey. And they had to get their picture taken with it to explain. And as other people were walking through, they were explaining to the other people walking through what that was without even having to look at what else was there. So this little whole game project has spanned a whole lot. Using it with my older kids, you saw a picture of Phil talking about video games. He showed us one video game called Zork, which is, there's no pictures, it's all just text. I use that concept when we talk about how to read a book from the cover. And then I take the cover off and there's nothing there. How do you know about that book? So we use that kind of as a jumping point to work within the library system itself. So this was an awesome experience. I can't say enough. If you have the chance, hint, hint, if you have the chance or know somebody that would be part of this, I would totally push them into it.
One of the original charges, and I think this speaks to it, is that one of the experiences in working also with people from the state capitol who do tours and try to promote the state capitol is one of our design challenges was to say, hey, there are a lot of, you know, Mike comes from a long distance to bring his kids, but we have students from all over the state of Wisconsin who are not able to go to the state capitol. So one of the design challenges we had is how do you give them at least a feel, an introduction to the state capitol that's a little bit different than the way that they would typically encounter it otherwise, which would be through watching a video, or they were working on some 360 VR stuff as well. The other thing that I think Mike points to is this notion that this is about historical inquiry. One of the critiques of document-based inquiry within the social studies is that very often it's decontextualized from stories, so you might get a little packet of archival documents and you interpret them and look at how they're sourced and collaboration and all of that, but very often they're decontextualized from the real stories that take place. So we're also trying to use that narrative-based thing to bring in the idea of women's suffragists and what the role that Wisconsin played historically in it. So that was another of our sort of pivots, I think, within this. We are going to be offering a new fellowship this fall. So some of you this actually might be relevant to in terms of knowing someone who teaches 3rd through 5th grade, or you might be a 3rd through 5th grade teacher. We would love to have you participate. Typically, we have a cycle in our fellowships, and WPT does a similar thing, which is that we work with teachers in order to design the games, but we know that it's also important to be thinking about, well, how do these games get used at the local level? Right? The way that a particular game gets used here versus here versus here is going to be different. So we bring together teachers, again, to talk about different ways you can implement games in the classroom, and then build curriculum or lessons or activities, situations, context that they can use the game in. One of our hopes is that folks will actually take this and pivot to go out into their own local communities, encourage their students to do local inquiry. One of our long-term goals that we would love to do is actually create an authoring platform. So we have other tools that we build that are authoring platforms for people to make their own games. We would love to create an authoring platform that people could then work with young people, students, to create content so they're telling their own stories of their local family's history or their local community history in some way using artifacts from the community. So that would be our pitch, when we think about how do we move from us building stuff to democratizing the sort of production aspects of making games. Field day, we'll end here with any questions as well, but you can reach out to us. Definitely check out the other content and media that both of us, Field Day, but also Wisconsin Public Television makes for a lot of it for young kids, but not exclusively for young kids around Wisconsin, focused on Wisconsin history. Just so you know, we also, Dave and I are going to be working with a couple other people to do a talk, I think tomorrow, just more generally about our model of fellowships and working with teachers. So if some of you who are interested in that should check that session out. We'll take questions now about the game, about Mike's experience, about either of our organizations, about the fellowship process.
Two things. One, I have to question the wisdom of encouraging small children to have a Badgers pet. But when are you going to bring it to high school?
When are we bringing this game into high school?
Or doing projects in high school?
Oh,
high
okay.
school level?
Yeah, so we have another fellow, I'll PR another fellowship we have, thank you. Well, we're also working, one of the other things that we do here, generally, is that particularly folks who are doing science research here, but not exclusively science research, very often have, and humanities research as well, but have a portion of their work has to be, okay, how do I take this research and the ideas about this research and teach the public about them, right? So we're going to be working with Scalable Systems Lab over in the engineering department. They're doing some cutting edge research to try to essentially, in some ways, save our lakes from phosphorus. They've been doing some modeling around how do you develop systems to, it's actually much more exciting than I'm making it sound, but this is the key word. How do you create systems that keep manure from going into the lakes? Technologies, economic systems, et cetera. So we're bringing together a group of high school teachers this fall in order to build a game to teach that in high school science classes. We also have some other things where we have, if you go to Field Day, there are also other media that we produce specifically for high school. If you're interested in having people author things, high school students, we have a augmented reality authoring platform called ARIS that you can build geolocative interactive stories and games with as well, which a lot of high school and college, middle school people are using.
And Aaron, I'd encourage you to visit. Kristen has a table for WPT education down by the Keynote area. We do a lot of projects that are high school focused as well. And one that we're featuring here is our student reporting labs, working with NewsHour to teach youth media production. We've got a couple friends here that have been working on that.
I will just add one more thing I forgot to say, and that is usually when you play a video game that you have to read directions, most kids don't read it. They just click, 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 click. So it was really fun to have a diverse group of kids in a class where some of the kids that were a little bit quieter were reading it, and they finished the game first, and they were not video game kids. So they were like, well, how did you do that? So they got a little upset. And their simple answer was, we read the directions. So it slowed, the next time we play tested, it really slowed those kids down to kind of read. So it was good.
We'll go here and then, yeah.
I don't mean to be a heavy downer here, but so what are the outcomes that you're finding with students in terms of skill mastery of the main concepts you're trying to teach in the game? So you have like a comparison between students who haven't had access to this game there, but they've been taught those basic concepts, students who had access to that game, same concepts, and then comparing them so we can understand how well is this teaching the concepts you're trying to teach? How well is this introducing them to the things you want them to be introduced to?
Yeah, so we have not done any extensive A/B testing around learning outcomes. And I want to make also another distinction between the way that we're framing this game is that within an inquiry model, very often you have some kind of introductory hook to raise engagement and curiosity. And so the way that when we talked with teachers, we were trying to lead with that being the activity versus we are saying that we want to teach students how to do A, B, or C within this context. Right now we're framing it, and we might learn more when we start to do that type of sort of testing in terms of learning outcomes, is that the biggest one that we have very anecdotal light on is that, does this increase your interest in doing more of this type of work? Does that make sense? Because if it does, that's where then the teachers are involved in saying, well, how do I use this as a launching pad for us to do other types of work? So we weren't setting out with our goal being that they are going to learn A, B, and C, other than the idea that you use evidence in order to build historical arguments about things. That was like the lowest bar in terms of what we wanted students to be able to walk away with, that you build evidence. We weren't interested in like testing them on, do you know more about women's suffrage after this? Sure. It wasn't about teaching content. It's really about historical inquiry process. And that's a really big distinction as well, the difference between content and process and developing those skills. So we were really pushing much more in the direction of increasing interest and engagement as a launch. And number two would be the process and skills.
And part of that was the teachers giving us feedback that they wanted an opportunity to then walk outside their door and be like, why is this statue here? What steps can we take to figure out, rather than super focus on keeping them within the confines of the game.
Yeah, it also allowed everybody to talk about primary sources, which then became the is it real or fake type of a thing that's kind of been really big the last couple of months, year. So primary sources became a big issue for me then to work with that.
Go in the back. You still have a question?
How long did it take to create this game from when you had the idea and then working with the teachers and designing, getting the feedback? What process was that?
It was really
I feel this one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm behind
Yeah.
Just really quickly, we had about 6 months of time where we were just thinking, kind of openly, had some of the fellowship. But then our production phase was a strict 6-month production burn. So from when we started to when we finished any code development, hard assets, writing, all that happened within 6 months, including what 4 primary iterations of the actual game.
Just about this time last year, we had that first workshop I showed you. That happened last year. And then the second one happened in the spring, and then there's a game built. So it went pretty quickly. That doesn't include the introductory conversations that we had between our organizations. But when we actually put other people in the room, it was a 1 year time. Or do you still have a question?
Somewhat answered there, just about when focusing on inquiry and content, but also art direction is gorgeous. Who's in charge of that?
Sarah Gagnon was involved in it. It was a communication and art
Rodney.
director. Rodney was involved in it. So this was another great example. Can't say enough about institutional relationships that leverage distribution, expertise, artwork, bringing in different, we, even as a team, we get it focused like this, so having other people come in. And WP Rodney's on the staff for doing art direction there as well.
Carrie likes the font too. She
Yeah. That could be Eric Lang, who's also an artist with us and does a lot of the UI stuff, is involved.
It's nice because it age appropriate, because those 3rd and 5th graders aren't necessarily easy to woo sometimes. You're too kiddie or whatever.
Yeah.
But this, like, I'm an adult and I could see older kids also finding it.
Yeah.
And that's not how it started.
Yeah. Okay.
That wasn't there. So.
I think my favorite part of this whole process was the day in the second fellowship when we just took an hour to talk about what 4th graders like. And I was coming from a high school background, that was just like wild. Fidget spinners.
Yeah.
That's dating the project already.
And another comment that we talked about a lot as a team was that because kids have experience playing a lot of different games, we got feedback even from my own 4th grader that like it should either look crappier or better because they play Zelda, they've seen Oregon Trail like games, and it's really hard to find that sweet spot of a game with actually a pretty small budget for the art to hit that sweet spot.
Yeah. There's also a challenge of how much when you get feedback from people and how much feedback as designers those of you who do it, right? So there are certain times we probably would have wanted to get more feedback at certain times in it, but we still did try to work with talking to kids to say. And then the badger, we almost named it Scoville, the name of the badger.
That would not be very risky.
Yeah. You had a question?
No, I was just saying I really enjoyed playing it. I'm a 4th and 5th grade teacher here in Madison, and I can immediately see, to be careful to distinguish it as this would be a great accompaniment to instruction. It's not you're going to replace your curriculum. But in terms of like talking about the learning outcomes, I mean, I feel like that's sort of the reality we're living in now in the age of accountability. And so it would be like, I don't know, are there plans to like, if you do align learning outcomes or you align standards to playing a game like this, it might be nice to have a way to track where students are in playing the game. Unless that's maybe not the intended use of the game. Maybe it's just like using the game as a good entrance into, historical inquiry. Or can you actually justify that, like my students spent 5 hours on this game, and these are the standards that they've progressed through.
So I think there's a great distinction, and we are working towards the latter. I think right now, when you talk about data analytics and games and assessment, that's the gold standard. And it's in different games, we dial that up more in different of our designs. This one, we were leading with the former, and now we're coming in a little bit later to try to align those things. But let me qualify that, Bill, to say, we started with state standards and talked to teachers about things that they were having trouble working with their kids on. Where do they want to bring in a little bit more engagement or excitement? And there are standards that it's aligned with. I think the other one particularly is around the literacy and plus social studies, which I know the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction and from social studies is really pushing that as well.
Yeah, what was the process of creating the look and style for the game? Because the art was really engaging and enjoyable, and I think that's a huge part about getting people engaged in this. And so really good job.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So the cool part about collaborating with Field Day was I was an artist coming from WBT, sitting in their room and like doing the design work with them. But they had the final artist. Her name is Reyna. Do you know Reyna's last name? Groff. Reyna did the final artwork, and basically we came up with this negotiation of let me do the designing element. So I designed the backgrounds. I designed a lot of the animations and stuff like that, and then she would come over and paint it so she could just focus on the beauty of the game. And so doing that in tandem.
I really like the lake background.
Yeah.
Playing alongside, and she also liked the lake part. That's so cool.
Yeah, we really talked about the importance of making this game have layers to it and have this parallax move. And so making some objects in the foreground, middle ground, and background, and trying to negotiate that space and play with really great lighting scenes. And that was actually a scene that people were super excited to make with the lighting and stuff like that. So.
I also can't say enough about having Sarah Gagnon, who is an art director, creative director for Field Day and communications person, with a really strong vision to really have these games be enjoyable to play from a visual standpoint. And it's something that I think that she's really pushed us as a design team to bring that in. We are going to, unfortunately, we're going to get, John's got something to say.
Well, brainwave, I just wanted to also say, like, Sarah, before any of that process, Gagnon went through several iterations of art inspiration boards, and the team discussed those. Yeah, she's, one thing I would say working with Field Day that has been really nice is, like, they have this deeper expertise in science games at the middle school level, but to see the way that Sarah and the whole team there attacked the idea of a narrative game and really making story central and important to and married to the learning that happens in the game was really awesome and inspiring. We haven't really had enough chance to talk about the way that the silly sort of badger getting stolen storyline is actually built in to reflect historical inquiry practices through the detective work that then needs to be done to save Teddy the badger. There's just so many layers of the way that the story and the art work with the core mechanic of the game that are, I think, really awesome.
And that'll be a different session, which is about the design of the game and the mechanics and the relationship. We're going to stop here. Thank you so much for coming out. Ben, you can sign up for our fellowship. All right, thank you.